Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something absolutely fascinating and, yeah, definitely a bit provocative. We're going to objectively break down a highly misunderstood source text, the Satanic Bible 2.0. Whether you're totally new to religious philosophy or you're a seasoned scholar, the goal today is to just cut right through all that societal noise. We're leaving our preconceived notions at the door and looking strictly at what the text actually says.
Look, when most of us hear the word Satanism, our brains instantly jump to, cheesy horror movies, midnight rituals, or whatever Hollywood has fed us over the years. But the text we're analyzing today, the Satanic Bible 2.0, completely frames itself as an official religious text and a deeply structured philosophy. It's a worldview built on very specific rules, and today we're going to map out exactly what those are. So, that brings us to the big question. What does Satanism actually teach? We really need to challenge those Hollywood assumptions about sacrifices and supernatural evil, because as you'll see, the source text runs as far away from those tropes as possible. Today is all about separating myth from reality, to understand the totally pragmatic, earthly philosophy that's actually written on these pages.
Okay, here's our roadmap. We've got a clear 5-part agenda today. First, origins and version 2.0. Second, the 9 satanic statements. Third, God, dogma, and sin. Fourth, hell and demons. And we'll wrap up with love, hate, and freedom.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Origins and Version 2.0, the Living Text. Now, what's super interesting here is that this text is not some ancient static relic. It actually divides its history into 2 eras. You have the pre-digital age, which is anchored by Anton LaVey's original 1969 text, and then the digital age. According to the source, the digital age officially kicked off in 2001. They literally call that year 1. And because human society is always evolving, the text mandates that this philosophy has to be updated every single decade to stay relevant. It's essentially an evolving software update for human empowerment, a true living document.
But, we really can't talk about the modern text without giving a massive nod to its foundation. Anton LaVey was absolutely instrumental here. The source highlights his total disdain for what he called occult nonsense. He actually mocked people who played around with Ouija boards or stood inside pentagrams waiting for demons to show up. He just saw all that as total self-deception. Instead, he built a philosophy that is highly practical, fiercely rational, and completely materialistic.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 9 satanic statements, the core philosophy.
So these statements are basically the bedrock of this entirely earthbound worldview. They completely toss out spiritual mysticism in favor of real, earthly rules. The text boldly declares, Satan means indulgence instead of abstinence. And wow, what a radical pivot that is, right? I mean, traditional religions usually preach self-denial, fasting, spiritual purity, but this philosophy goes in the exact opposite direction. It argues that earthly, physical indulgence is not something to feel guilty about. It's literally the whole point of existence.
Let's look at how this breaks down across the 9 statements. Basically, they champion vital existence over, spiritual pipe dreams, and they value undefiled wisdom over hypocritical self-deceit. They completely swap out unconditional love for kindness only to those who actually deserve it, and instead of turning the other cheek, they openly advocate for vengeance. Now, Statement 7 is absolutely crucial. It views humanity not as divine beings, but just as another animal species. Sometimes we're better, but often we're way worse than the animals walking on all fours. And finally, with a pretty great sense of dark humor, they point out that Satan is literally the best friend the church has ever had. Why? Because the fear of him has kept those institutions in business for centuries.
Which brings us to Section 3, God, dogma, and sin, reframing morality. Okay, having established humanity's earthly desires, you might be wondering, how do they define God? Well, the source definitely doesn't view God as some bearded man in the sky pulling the strings. Instead, God is seen simply as an impersonal, balancing force of nature. And because this natural force doesn't care about human suffering or benevolence, praying to it, the text says that's entirely useless. Instead of folding your hands in prayer, it demands that humans take direct responsibility for their own actions and literally shape their own destinies.
Because of this hyper-pragmatic view, the text does something wild. It actively takes the traditional 7 deadly sins and champions them. Seriously, they view these as completely natural human instincts that drive positive physical, mental, or emotional gratification. Think about it. Greed, that's simply ambition, wanting more, which is what actually drives human progress. Gluttony is just physical satisfaction. Pride isn't a sin, it's just healthy self-esteem and taking care of yourself. They argue that if natural human instincts are considered sins, well, then literally everyone is a sinner by default.
All right, let's dive into Section 4, Hell and Demons, Art and Metaphor.
So if there's no literal God, do they believe in a literal hell? Even though symbols like the horned beast or Baphomet look super intimidating, the text explicitly says these are not literal physical monsters hiding in the dark. Nope. Instead, they represent absorbed pagan gods. Think Pan or Dionysus, who originally symbolized earthly nature and fertility, long before later religions rebranded them as devils. So really, they're just pure artistic metaphors for opposing strict dogma.
The hell and the devil are merely man-made constructs. They argue that the whole concept of the fiery pits of hell is just a scare tactic, literally invented to maintain behavioral control over religious followers. It's all about fear. And if you remove that fear of hell, well, traditional churches lose their main tool for controlling the masses. To a Satanist, the devil is just a symbol of rebellion against that exact fear, definitely not some entity you're supposed to worship. And this all builds into this incredibly beautiful symbolic universe. During their rituals, they invoke what they call the 4 crown princes of hell. But again, not literal demons. Satan represents the south and fire. Lucifer is the east and air. Belial is the north and earth. And Leviathan is the west and water. They're just categorized as representations of natural elements. It's basically a psychological psychodrama designed to help release pent-up emotion, not a way to magically summon the supernatural.
Let's wrap up with Section 5, Love, Hate, and Freedom, the pragmatics of relationships.
When we get into human connection, the text argues fiercely against the idea of universal love. It says that if you force yourself to love everybody, even your worst enemies, you're actually cheapening and watering down true affection. Instead, they advocate for targeted love. Basically, you should love deeply, absolutely, completely, but only give it to those who actually deserve it. On the flip side, they argue that acknowledging and releasing your natural hate toward people who have genuinely wronged you is way healthier than just bottling it up and suppressing it. The text also takes a super clear, objective stance on sexual freedom. It utterly rejects both religious prudishness and the idea of forced promiscuity. According to the source, true sexual freedom is simply doing whatever naturally fulfills you with absolutely zero guilt. But there is one massive, non-negotiable caveat. It must harm no unwilling participants. So whether your personal fulfillment looks like strict monogamy, exploring specific fetishes, or even complete asexuality, it's completely celebrated as long as it's your natural truth.
But listen, it isn't all cold logic and physical indulgence. The text actually includes an integrated poem about the frozen heart. It speaks of deep longing, of a brain that has gone mad, and a heart that cries out in the void. It's really poignant because it shows that this philosophy doesn't just ignore human pain. It grapples deeply with the sorrow and the isolation that's just inherent in the human condition, but it offers self-empowerment as the ultimate cure.
And that brings us to the absolute climax of the philosophy. I am a Satanist. Bow down, for I am the ultimate embodiment of human life. Wow. Now remember, this is not about worshiping a deity. It is a massive, powerful assertion of self-deification. The ultimate goal of this entire text is radical human empowerment. It's about stripping away all that societal guilt, rejecting any unseen masters, and placing the individual human firmly at the center of their own universe, acting as their own ultimate authority. Which brings us to the end of today's explainer, and I want to leave you with this one, really provocative thought drawn straight from the implications of this text. If our natural, purely biological instincts are labeled by society as evil, well, how much of your morality is truly your own, and how much of it has just been programmed into you through fear? It's a wildly fascinating question that totally challenges the foundation of our societal norms. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into the source material. Stay curious, keep questioning, and I will catch you in the next explainer.